Those of you who've been following my channel already know that I bought the Pixel 10 Pro on day one. Honestly, I love it. I love how much power it packs into a relatively compact body. I love the camera, the software, and even the moonstone color makes me super happy. However, not everyone out there can afford a $1,000 smartphone. Not everyone needs all the fancy camera features that come with the Pro phones. Those people might want to know what it's like to use the regular Pixel 10 and not the Pro. For the past week, I've ditched my Pixel 10 Pro and used the Pixel 10 in its place. And you know what? It hasn't made much of a difference. Well, mostly, anyway. So I'm going to split this video into two parts. The first part will see me going over the things I experienced with the Pixel 10 that were basically the same as the Pixel 10 Pro, as well as the few things that I actually like more about the Pixel 10. The second part will go over the things I missed about the Pro model while I was using the non-Pro model. At the end, I'll give a quick summary of my thoughts. So let's jump right in with the thing that is pretty much the same across both phones, which is the design. If you just glanced at the Pixel 10 and Pixel 10 Pro, you'd probably be hard pressed to tell them apart. While there are subtle differences, they are exactly the same size. In fact, cases are interchangeable between them. So if you've got your eye on an amazing case that's advertised for the Pixel 10 Pro, don't worry, because it will also work on the Pixel 10. That's certainly the case for this model from Thinborn. No, Thinborn didn't sponsor this video or anything. I just really like the case. Of course, there are a few differences in design. One difference that I absolutely love is the fact that the aluminum rails here are matte on the Pixel 10, whereas the Pixel 10 Pro has polished rails. I don't know about you, but the matte rails not only look better in my eyes, but they are also grippier. This makes it much easier to hold the phone if you decide not to use a case, like I do 99% of the time. The matte rails also line up with the matte camera bar, so it just looks more cohesive across the entire phone. Google, if you're listening to this, get rid of the polished rails on the Pixel 11 series. Go with matte all the time instead. The other very obvious difference is the colors. I don't like the Pixel 10's Frost colorway nearly as much as I like the Pixel 10 Pro's Moonstone, but it's not ugly or anything. I wish I had the Indigo model because that thing is... But this is the color Google sent me, so I've had to deal. Moving on from design, let's talk about the display. On paper, the Pixel 10 Pro's display is much better than the Pixel 10's by pretty much every metric. But you know what? None of this made a difference to me over the past week. I have my Pixel 10 Pro's resolution set to 1080p, since having it set to 1440p needlessly drains the battery. So it looks basically the same on the Pixel 10. I know the refresh rate doesn't go as low on the Pixel 10 as it does on the Pro, but there was no situation this week in which that mattered to me, at least when it comes to the visuals themselves. I know the Pro model has a more pixel-dense display, but this didn't matter to me either. I also know that the Pixel 10 Pro technically gets brighter than the Pixel 10, but even under the bright Hawaiian sun, that didn't make the slightest difference in my experience. In other words, the spec sheet might say that the Pixel 10 Pro has a much better display, but in the real world, those numbers don't mean much. The Pixel 10 Pro has an amazing display, and so does the Pixel 10. What about performance? Well, the Pixel 10 and Pixel 10 Pro have the same processor, which is Tensor G5. As such, speeds and general smoothness were very comparable between the two phones. Throughout my day, the things I do the most are watch YouTube videos, check email, browse Reddit, send texts, and control my smart home through the Homey app. Every single one of these things work just as well on the Pixel 10 as on the Pixel 10 Pro. The one significant difference in performance between the two phones is the amount of RAM. The Pixel 10 is 12 gigs, while the Pixel 10 Pro has 16 gigs. There wasn't a time during this week that I pushed the phone to the point where I would notice this difference, but I'm pointing this out because if you're watching this and are a big multitasker or like to have a bazillion apps open at once, the lack of those extra 4 gigabytes of RAM could make a difference. For me though, I didn't notice anything. What about battery life? Honestly, both phones are pretty comparable here. They each get me through an entire day without issue, including taking lots of photos and videos, streaming music from my Plex server, and using Google Maps pretty often. If I had to pick one over the other, I'd say the Pixel 10 might be slightly better for battery life, which makes sense considering its battery capacity is actually larger than the Pixel 10 Pro. However, it's not like a night and day difference. I wouldn't choose one over the other based on battery life alone. That's what I'm saying. Also, the Pixel 10 has Pixel Snap included, so all the magnetic accessories I've been using on the Pixel 10 Pro work just fine with the Pixel 10. The Pixel 10 even charges at the same speeds, both with a cable and wirelessly, so there are no differences there either. Honestly, these phones really are so similar. That being said, it's now time to move into the second section of this video, which is where I discuss the things that I did miss from my Pixel 10 Pro. The first thing I want to talk about is, well, it's kind of embarrassing. I hate to be that guy and talk about bezels, but after using the Pixel 10 Pro for the past few weeks, the thicker bezels on the Pixel 10 are noticeable. It might be that people who have never used a Pixel before won't notice or care, but I definitely missed my slimmer bezels while using the Pixel 10. I know, I'm on video right now complaining about a 1/10 of a millimeter difference in bezels. It makes me feel very icky, but I'm trying to be honest with my viewers on this channel. And my honest opinion is that the thicker bezels did make me sad. Speaking of this channel, I've only been doing this for a few months now, so I'm still pretty new here. If you've watched this far and like what I'm doing, please drop me a like and subscribe, as that can really help out young channels like mine. Also, thanks so much for being here. It really means a lot to me. The next thing I really missed from my Pixel 10 Pro are the cameras. Every single lens on the Pixel 10 is weaker than the corresponding lens on the Pixel 10 Pro. This results in images and videos that just, well, aren't as good. For those of you who are new to Pixels, the way it used to work is that the standard Pixel would have 2 lenses on the back, a standard and an ultra wide. These same 2 lenses would appear on the Pro model, but with the addition of a third telephoto lens. This was a great setup, because most of the photos people take use the standard lens. So they would be exactly the same quality as what you'd get from one of the Pro level phones. This year though, Google abandoned that system. It added a telephoto lens to the Pixel 10, which is really cool. But to do that without significantly increasing the cost of the phone, it nerfed all the other lenses. Now, no matter what lens you're using to shoot with, you're going to get lesser results than you would with a Pro model. Sure, the Pixel 10's photos aren't bad, not in the slightest, but the Pixel 10 Pro's photos are just better. This is especially obvious when you use the telephoto lens to zoom in on your subject. The 48 megapixel telephoto on the Pro completely obliterates the 10.8 megapixel lens on the Pixel 10. This also makes a huge difference for selfies. The Pro's front-facing camera is not only better, but it has a wider field of view, so you don't need to hold out your arm nearly as far to get more of yourself in the shot. Unfortunately, things don't stop there. A big thing I missed was being able to take 50 megapixel portrait mode shots, especially while I was in Hawaii. I also missed the ability to zoom past 20x. I've already talked a few times about how the 100x super res zoom on the Pixel 10 Pro is a bit controversial due to its use of AI, but having the ability to zoom past 20x when you want to is certainly nice. Even if you don't think you'd ever need to go past 20x, the 20x shot from the Pixel 10 Pro still looks a lot better. I also missed macro focus in both photos and videos. I don't use this every day, that's for sure, but when I do use it, it's pretty cool. Look at the difference between these 2 shots to see what the Pro can do that the standard model just can't. I also missed Pro controls. With the Pixel 10 Pro, you can finely tune your shot using things like focus, shutter speed, and ISO, giving you much more control than the typical white balance, shadows, and exposure settings. If you know how to use these, they can be really powerful. Unfortunately, they aren't available on the Pixel 10, which was disappointing. Finally, video quality wasn't as good or as versatile either. Not only did the video clips look weaker on the Pixel 10, but it's also missing a few very important video features, including night sight. Night sight video is a lifesaver when you're in low light situations, which happened quite a bit on my trip to Hawaii. With the Pixel 10, I found myself thinking, well, I can just upload this to Video Boost and fix it later. But that also isn't available on the Pixel 10. Another thing that's bizarrely missing from the Pixel 10 is the ability to record 4K video at 60 frames per second on all 4 lenses. Although you can record at 4K 60 on 3 of the lenses, you're stuck at 4K 30 or lower using the ultra-wide lens. With the Pixel 10 Pro, you've got access to 4K 60 recording on all 4 lenses. I'm telling you, video on the Pixel 10 really was disappointing all around. Granted, the only reason this was all disappointing is because I'm so used to the Pixel 10 Pro, and before that, the Pixel 9 Pro, and I've grown to depend on these features. But if you've never used a Pixel 10 Pro before, then you won't have that same problem. You'll probably be plenty happy with the Pixel 10. What did I come away with from my time with the Pixel 10? My overall sentiment is that the Pixel 10 is the perfect phone for pretty much anyone. It does all the core things you need it to do, and even has a few bonuses to it, like matte rails, slightly better battery life, and most importantly, a much lower price. Really, the only reason to pay more for the Pro model is if you really want the best and most feature-rich camera you can get, or if you really think those extra 4 gigs of RAM will make a difference for your use. Outside of those things, there's really no reason to spend more on the Pro. Just get a Pixel 10. As a content creator though, the camera is really important to me. So I'm happy to be going back to my Pixel 10 Pro. However, I am glad I did this experiment, as it's made me much more comfortable with suggesting the Pixel 10 to people who might not want to spend as much money. But yeah, I'm still very happy about going back to my Pro. But as always, I want to know what you think. Do you think the Pixel 10 is a good buy over the Pixel 10 Pro? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Also, if you have any specific questions about the differences between the phones, throw them in the comments too. Either I'll address them or another viewer might jump in and handle it for me. In the meantime, if you want to know more about the Pixel 10 Pro and what it can do, I highly recommend checking out this video, which was completely shot on a Pixel 10 Pro and goes over all the cool video tools it has. If this is your first time here, don't forget to subscribe, as that really helps out young channels like mine. I'll see you all down in the comments.